Today I'm sitting with Josh. Josh, what do you do on a day-to-day basis?
Day-to-day basis, now that my son is off to college, which is a new switch for me, I generally take care of our pets. We have 7 cats, 3 dogs, and I split my days usually between coaching both pornography addicts and those who are dealing with betrayal trauma. And then I spend the other half of my day more of in education mode. I do a lot of writing, I do a lot of speaking, do a lot of podcasts like this, trying to explain to the world what pornography addiction and what uh, betrayal trauma are, how we have to take them seriously, how they may be even in your life and you don't realize it. Because this is an addiction and this is a type of trauma that a lot of people really don't want to talk about. They really don't want to address it because they're shamed, they're embarrassed. Pornography involves nudity and sex, so that immediately makes it a taboo for a large number of people in our society. So I try to spread the message that pornography is it's neither good nor evil. It's a thing, and just like everything else in this world. And if we want to use it correctly, which some people can't, like me, because I was an addict. But if we want to use it correctly, we need to know more about it. And parents need to inform their kids about the potential downfalls. And we need to have an educated society because I believe an educated society makes the best individual decisions and the best collective decisions. But so few people are willing to talk about either pornography addiction or betrayal trauma because of all the taboos around it. So I'm putting myself out there and I can be everybody's first friend who they met with porn addiction. So now you can move on with your life and recognize it's a real thing. So that's largely, I mean, even though it's funny, I haven't really looked at porn in 7, 8 years.
Mhm.
I talk about it more than I ever have in my life.
That's a hell of an intro. Most people are like, "Yeah, I like to go do this and do that."
I
Um,
like cheese and the color blue.
yeah, exactly. Um, no, you're totally right. I loved everything you just said. That was so good. And you know, when it came to when you said about the taboo, for me, I think a lot of people are ashamed about it. They're ashamed that they jerk off to porn. I know like I do my fair share, and whenever I'm done, I always feel like a loser. I always feel like I'm, ashamed. And I think, it's really hard for a lot of people to admit their faults, and especially something as, you could say as shameful as pornography.
Right. And one of the things I like, and I do want to stress up front, I am not anti-pornography.
Hmm.
I am pro healthy sexuality. And I think that there are a lot of people who are using pornography in an unhealthy way out there who may not realize it, that may lead to other things, much like for me and for hundreds of other men and women that I've met. Um, One of the reasons I'm out there doing this is because I wonder, could my parents, could my teachers, could a doctor, could anybody have said something to a young version of myself that wouldn't have led me down that road?
Hmm.
And that's really one of the things I think about when I'm out there educating, writing books, talking to people like yourself, or even just coaching one on one is, can I help this situation with knowledge, with data, with understanding what's happening? There are a lot of coaches out there who will burn sage and do all kinds of crazy stuff with spirits and tarot cards. And if you're into all that stuff, that's perfectly fine. If that helps you, that's perfectly fine. My method of dealing with things is to look at the best possible data and to see how people behave and to look at what we know, because I believe that behavioral economics is absolutely going to be one of the things that leads us in further into this century in helping understand mental health and how people behave. People work in cycles. People are very predictable. You talk to 3,000 men between the ages of 40 and 50, you're going to find a lot of similarities, even though they may be very different people from all around.
Hmm.
Um, and that's the thing. So, what do you find? What do you learn from these people? That's the kind of stuff that I take into my counseling. I'm not going to ask you to go to the woods and scream as loud as you can. If you want to do that, enjoy yourself. I'm going to look at what we can do as far as number one, removing your triggers, because you need to be able to focus on the bigger thing. And the bigger thing usually is unresolved trauma. Addiction with people is not the main problem. And that's what society also doesn't understand. Addiction is not the main problem. Addiction is the response to another problem. We
Hmm.
become addicts because of something else. With porn addiction, it is almost across the board unresolved trauma from abuse in childhood.
Oh, you're totally right. I definitely believe in that. That addiction is like the addiction is not a disease. Addiction is just a coping mechanism like, for
It
whatever
is
it is.
scientifically a disease, and I
Yeah.
didn't believe this for many many years. Then I had some actual uh, neur- neurological scientists, doctors, explain it to me how it truly is a disease and fits the definition of disease, because it does rewire your brain, and it
Hmm.
does cause you to involuntarily have uh, needs for
Yeah.
your substance or behavior.
Impulses.
So it is a disease, but it also is a disease that can be managed. It's a
Hmm.
disease that can be overcome. You're right, it does start out as a coping mechanism. Nobody ever wants to be an addict.
Yeah.
We start because we find something that makes us feel better in the moment. And when you think about what makes us feel better, TV at the end of the day makes us feel better. A warm shower in the morning makes us feel better. We have plenty of routines in our life. We have plenty of habits. But what you have to be careful of is when one of those habits devolves into addiction. And in 99% of the cases, you don't realize you're an addict until you're there. And by that point, you've done the damage. So it's challenging to come back from it. That's why I think we need to talk about this early, talk about this with younger people, get this out into society, that before these kids who have access to high speed internet and access to the kind of extreme pornography that people who grew up at a time that I did with videotapes and magazines, the internet wasn't a thing till I was about 20. Those of us who grew up with magazines and videotapes may not understand just how much dopamine and how much serotonin and oxytocin and whatnot can be produced from the type of stuff you find on the internet. And my generation is sending their kids onto the internet, sending their kids off to school with their smartphones. And because it's shameful, because we don't want to talk about sex, because we, are afraid or whatever it is, we send our kids into this world not prepared. And
Hmm.
I'll let parents know, whenever I've given a speech like this to a group, I've always got parents say, well, we have filters on our phone. And it's like, well, fantastic that you've locked down one phone out of 4.8 billion in the world. But but
Yeah.
those statistics still aren't really good for the kid not seeing porn. And I tell parents, if you have a 10 or 11-year-old kid, the statistics say they've already seen porn. The vast majority of boys see porn now by 9 years old. Vast majority of girls see porn by 11 years old. And if you don't know what your kid is going to say and what your kid is going to do when they are presented with pornography from their friend on the bus or one of the kids in the locker room on their soccer team or whatever it is, if you don't know how they're going to respond and what they're going to say, you really haven't porn proofed your kids at all. And the most important thing is you can't porn proof your kids. You need to teach them what pornography is and how to stay away with it. We're never going to get rid of it completely. We're never going to end addiction. You could teach every person in the world about alcoholism or cigarettes or even cocaine or heroin, and there are still
Hmm.
going to be people who use it. But I think we should at least see what happens if we address it with the younger people. because right now, the best statistic we have, which comes pre pandemic, so I know it's worse, was in 2017. An organization in Texas released a poll. They interviewed thousands of men. In the 18 to 30-year-old group, 32% said that they either looked at too much porn, had a bad relationship with porn, or were believed they were a full on porn addict. Now, that's
Hmm.
one out of three men between 18 and 30, the age group that does not remember a world before the internet, that grew up with this stuff, unhinged access to it. Now, one out of three men who grew up in this world of the internet thinks they have a negative issue with pornography. That's scary. What happens when these guys turn 40 or 50 or 60? What about the women? They're right now at about 18% in that age group, but that's going up. Before long, you're going to see one out of four women who are under 30 who have an issue with pornography. So if we don't start addressing this and snuff out addicts before they are created, I can't imagine where this world's going to be 20, 30, 40 years. How sexually unhealthy will we be? What kind of epidemic is that going to be when so many people in our country have an addiction, which, like I said, it's a disease and it's a health problem, to pornography?
No, that's you. You got it. You. I love it. You're just really good at talking. I love it. I totally agree with you. It just goes back to how we are the most connected but yet most disconnected generation that has ever lived, because with our phones we're so connected with each other. I can look what we're doing right now. Where do you live?
Exactly. I live in Maine.
Exactly. I live in Idaho, and we're having a conversation. That was never possible in all of humanity. But yet at the same time, like there may be like the love of my life may be outside right now, right? But after this interview, I could pull up my phone, jerk off, and then not have the desire to go find a mate, you know? Because it's just easy. It's instant right then and there. I can disconnect from my desires.
And that's one of the problems with pornography for people who aren't even addicts, is that
Mm.
happens. I'll tell you, when people ask me, so what's the real danger of pornography? I don't even talk about addiction. It's a big problem, but the bigger problem is with these younger people who have, uh, no overseeing or no not being taught what is good or what is not. People make a mistake in believing that telling your kids about pornography is part of the birds and the bees speech. And it's not. It's part of the don't smoke cigarettes speech. It's part
Yeah.
of the don't drink alcohol speech. It's the when you're 18 years old and you're an adult, you can make your own decisions. But while you live here with us in our house, I don't want you to see this stuff. And it's something where at 6 years old, you can tell a kid, you don't let anybody see what's under your bathing suit or under your underwear, and you don't look at what's under anybody else's, and you don't let anybody take a picture of you without your clothes on, and you don't do that with anybody else. And if you're using your tablet or a friend of yours is playing with their phone and you see naked people, please just come let me know, because kids aren't supposed to see that stuff. So just let me know if you see it. And a kid who is 6 or 7 is going to do that because you never said the word pornography. You never made it super scary. All you're doing is saying, hey, if this stuff happens, let me know. And then you
Hmm.
can go on to teach them to cross the street or to write in cursive or to do whatever it is you do, because it's just another lesson for a little kid. Kids want to learn, kids want direction, kids want to do the right thing. It's the perfect time to start teaching them about this stuff.
So with that, then, how do you? Because like for me, you know, I don't think I ever really got the birds and the bees talk. I kind of,
Do you want me to
exactly what.
explain it to you?
No, I got it. I think I got the basics. Well, exactly what you're saying is I learned all that stuff from the playground. The bus, the people, and like when I was, going through puberty or whatever. Like my dad told me one time, he's like, "Don't masturbate. Like just don't do it. You don't want to do it. It will ruin sex for you. And I'm like, okay. But then, jump forward like a month from then, it's like I'm laying in my bed and I don't care about cursing or anything on this podcast. It's full, full for it. Yeah, so it's like if my dick's hard and I'm laying in bed and I have like and I'm seeing like not even looking at pornography. I'm being fed, social media and my phone's a whole nother topic, but I'm being fed all these images and my human instincts are coming in. How are you supposed to tell a kid, hey, don't jerk off when that's all like they can do in that scenario?
And especially these days, and I'll tell you two quick little stories that I think are perfect. Uh, Buttressing this is number one. Think about when I was in high school. I was in high school from 1990 to 1994,
Mm-hmm.
while cell phones were just starting to show up. They were these big bricks, and you didn't take pictures with them. While the internet was just starting at the end of my high school years, I was the first person I knew in '94 who had an email address. I had to make friends online because none of my other friends in real life had an email
Yeah.
address. So, it's been out there for a while, but you got to real we didn't have social media. And if there would have been, let's say the hot sexy cheerleader, if there would have been a picture of her in her tiny little bikini being passed around, everybody would have clamored to see it. Everybody would have, it would have been like money, it was currency passing around. But let's fast forward now. Every high school kid has an Instagram page, and it is basically understood. If you're a girl, you're going to have some bikini pictures. And if you're a guy, you're going to have some pictures wearing some shorts with your shirt off outside or at the beach. It is so much more sexualized than when I was there. And really, what is, and we can get into this in a little while, but what is the huge difference between wearing a bikini top and not, and everybody seeing? Well, for a lot of women, there's very little difference. What's the difference between those skimpy little shorts and not wearing anything? Well, for a lot of guys, there's very little difference. And you have to realize that, you know, the people who are now under 30 and maybe even more appropriate under 25, they don't remember a world before the internet. So they've always had access to this stuff. So even though it is still somewhat of a taboo, it's so much less of a taboo with the under 30 crowd than it is with the over 30 crowd. So you have this wide gulf where, how is it that in the last 2 years, 2 million people have joined OnlyFans to make pornography? And those are mainly people under 30 who, the people over 30, even if they were amazing looking, wouldn't do it. My contemporaries would not have done that because it was not part of the culture. It's amazing when I talk to people about OnlyFans, how everybody under 40 absolutely knows about it, knows what it is. It's part of almost everyday culture, or it was for a while, even if it's starting to peter out a little. You talk to people over 40, they've never heard of OnlyFans. That's there's such a big difference there. So you do kind of have these two different communities out there. The 30 to 40 is kind of a gray area, but under 30, there's a lot more openness towards sexuality, nudity, and pornography. With the over 35, 40 crowd, it's such a bigger taboo, such a bigger issue, which is, I think, is why we don't hear much of it, because it's the people over 40 who tend to make the decisions for us in the world. And they're still scared to death of it. But what I wanted to mention was the last time I was able to go and give a proper presentation was a year and a half ago, a little bit before the pandemic started. I was here at a college in Maine. I went to a woman's sexuality group at a health center, probably about 20, 22 women there. And at the end of my whole presentation, I go to my Q&A, and there's this one mousy 19, 20-year-old woman who raises her hand and says, have you heard about women my age in college not wanting to have sex with virgin men? And I said, nope, I've never heard of that. And, thank God that didn't happen when I was there. But what does this have to do with pornography? And she's like, well, you're telling us that, the average boy sees pornography at 9, the average girl sees it at 11. Um, think about who comes to college. You said when you look at the men and women, or a lot of the or boys and girls when they go off, um, a lot of them, especially in the private institutions, tend to be the types of people who were not the most outgoing, who were a little bit more bookish, a little more shy, a little more introverted. So you have a much higher percentage of virgins, especially on the male side of things, who go off to college than in the control of their 18-year-old contemporaries that don't go to college. There's such a higher number, and I wish I had it off the top of my head, but it's a much higher number percentage wise of virgins in a freshman college or even sophomore college community than in the regular community. So that said, I figured out what she was driving at. The reality is, for boys who do get turned on to pornography at 10, 11, 12, 13, even if they don't become addicts and they enjoy it, they masturbate to it. Let's say that they average, one video a day. And we know that nobody looks at one video, but let's say they look at one video a day. If they're doing that from the age of 11 to the age of 17 or 18 when they go off to college, they've seen thousands and thousands of videos. And even if they're not watching any extreme stuff, they're just watching one man, one woman. Even the most vanilla porn out there over the last 10 years is about the man being the aggressor, the man saying horrible things to the woman, usually grabbing her by the neck, being very aggressive, maybe throwing her on the bed, bending her like a pretzel in crazy ways that real people don't bend. And also, just look at the way these things end. It's usually with a cum shot on the face, and that's pretty friggin' degrading. And if you've been in a normal, healthy sexual relationship in your life, you realize that pornography is fiction. Pornography is not a documentary. Pornography is not a reality show. People don't have sex like that. And people don't bend like that. And people don't talk like that. And every man's fantasy is a three-way. Well, you know what? It turns out only 15% of men ever take part in a three-way, and only 10% of women ever do. Another big thing is anal sex. Less than 20% of people ever have anal sex, yet you watch pornography and you would think this stuff happens every day behind every closed door. It doesn't. And these are the kinds of messages that these teenage boys are getting. So when it comes time that, finally some girl, finds them charming enough and they go back to their room, this guy is going to look at his catalog of porn in his head for how to behave.
His role
And
models, Sorry to
and
interrupt you.
that's it. If you're grabbing a girl by the neck and throwing her on the bed and say, I'm gonna fuck you hard, I guarantee you 97% of the women, especially young women, who are probably still somewhat new to the sexual arena themselves, are not going to be impressed. And when this girl was talking, I noticed some of the other females in the room kind of nodding or understanding. And what she said to me was, I always ask a guy if he's a virgin. And if he is, I don't want to be with him because I don't want to have to reteach him. I don't want to have him understand what you're supposed to be doing, how you're supposed to treat a woman. I've done that before. I don't want to do that again. It kills the mood. It's not fun. It's awkward. It's weird. So it's just better to find a guy who's not a virgin. And it's like, wow, that if, and I've, in the last year and a half, since I've told this story many times and talked to other women who are, under 25, I've heard this again and again when I bring it up, that they don't want to be with guys who are inexperienced because guys who are inexperienced take too many cues from pornography. And again, nothing to do with addiction there. Some of those guys probably end up addicted. However, we're just talking about how society operates on a day to day basis. And pornography is screwing up the minds, screwing up the expectations, screwing up the education of a wide swath of our young men. And that's why we need to have parents get involved. That's why we need schools to get involved. Imagine if, we learn about alcohol and drugs and whatnot in our health classes and our hygiene classes or whatever they call them in your area. What would happen if they spent one day talking about pornography? What would 1 hour do for all of these people's lives? I'm not suggesting you stop jerking off. I'm suggesting that when that's all you think about, when you're up to doing it 3 and 4 times a day, when you don't hang out with friends, when you're spending more time doing that than studying or working or doing that, that's when it becomes an addiction. That's when it becomes a problem. You need to know and be able to look out for that, because I wasn't able to. And that's why I am out here sharing this stuff. I hurt a lot of people when I was an addict. And I would just like to believe that I have enough time left on this earth that I can help enough people who might become addicts, but won't, because they've woken up a little bit. And that's why I'm doing this nights, I'm doing this weekends, I'm doing this mornings, is just that, if somebody cannot have the life and the negativity that I had surrounding pornography, especially at the very end, and not have to go through that early recovery, which, my God, that's difficult. But you have to get through it if you're going to get better. If I can stop people from having to go through those experiences, then my job here is good. And maybe this is why I was put on earth. I'm not going to get into all
Mhm.
the spiritual deepness of it, because there's never going to be an answer, but this is what it.
Well, we will, because that's the point of my podcast. Sorry to
Okay.
let you know.
Hey, I would love to. I
Um,
would love to get some answers. Then I can.
but let's go into your story. Let's
Yeah.
start at the beginning. What was your childhood like?
I had a very good childhood with my parents. They were elementary school teachers. Um, they had very rough upbringings. Three of their four parents were alcoholics. There was some physical abuse. They were very distant with their parents. When they met each other, I think they found a kindred spirit. And what was interesting was that they raised my brother and I in the 1980s very much like it was the 1950s. I think they
Hmm.
raised us to have the childhoods they didn't have. Um, and I think that they largely avoided negativity, and they largely avoided teaching us difficult things. And, you know, I could have my mom would let us watch HBO and all the Sylvester Stallone or Bruce Willis or Arnold Schwarzenegger films with tons of killing. But my God, if a breast or a butt ended up on TV, we had to change the channel immediately. So, that was an interesting message. But even more interestingly was the babysitter who I stayed with from a very young age up till about 7 or 8, um, especially before I started elementary school. That's where the shit really hit the fan. This woman, I can look back now, she was probably about 50 years old. She was morbidly obese. She was well over 300, maybe 400 pounds. But she also, I can look back now and recognize that she was very ill with OCDs, with a lot of her own trauma. Now that I understand this stuff, I can look back, but it doesn't excuse what she did. And what she did was a hell of a lot of mental and emotional abuse. And there was also a lot of sexual inappropriateness that went to and crossed the line into abuse at times. So when you're looking at statistics, Patrick Carnes, who's kind of the godfather in this area of study, he did a groundbreaking study back, I think it was in the mid 90s, maybe it was late 90s. And he found that in interviewing, again, thousands of men, from American men who ended up as porn or sex addicts, roughly 70% had some kind of unresolved physical trauma in their life from abuse. Around 80% had some kind of unresolved trauma from sexual abuse. And over 90% had some kind of trauma from emotional or mental abuse. So when you hear these figures, the odds are that the average guy who is a porn addict has been mentally, physically, and sexually abused. And they haven't dealt with it. And that's why, I discovered pornography when I was 12. That's when I became an addict. I became an addict in the first few minutes because I think that my body was looking for something to take all of this inner negativity, inner turmoil, and just find something that both made me feel better and made me forget about what happened. Pornography did that for me when I was 12. 2 years later, I got drunk for the first time. That started 22 years of alcoholism. So, whether I was 15 or whether I was 35, whether I was had nobody to date or whether I was married, whether my job was working full force or I was unemployed, it didn't matter because I always had pornography, and to a lesser extent, I always had alcohol in my life. And they were always the two things that could take care of my frustration, my anger, my paranoia, my stress, my anxiety, everything that was happening negative in my life. I always knew that I had these crutches of pornography and alcohol. Um, but I didn't even know pornography addiction was a real thing because nobody had ever mentioned it. I'm suffering with something that I don't even realize I have. I thought that my porn use and my excessive porn use mostly had to do with my alcoholism.
Hmm.
I thought I just looked at a lot of porn when I was drunk. Well, it turned out, and I had to learn this through a therapist, that porn addiction is a real thing. It's its own disease. It's its own addiction. And for me, it predated my alcoholism. And for me, if you look at those, points in my life when things were going bad, it was always pornography, not necessarily alcohol, I used as my giant crutch. Um, and that was something I never recognized till I actually saw an expert and who explained it to me in normal terms that, you're an alcoholic, but this other thing is not just a bad choice during alcoholism. This other thing is a full blown addiction unto itself that needs to be treated separately. And that was very eye raising to me. And that's one of the reasons why I do this stuff now, is because if I have to learn about porn addiction while I'm at rehab for alcoholism, that says that we're not getting the word out about porn addiction very much. So, it's a silent thing that we're so embarrassed about. We're not embarrassed about being an alcoholic, or we may be, but we're not embarrassed that we have a beer. We're embarrassed we look at porn. You know,
There's just something like that's not very masculine about being a porn addict. Like I don't know. At least my this is just my opinion. Addiction's addiction, but like you're smoking or you're drinking. It makes you. I don't know. There's just a more like masculine sense to it versus pornography is not like being addicted to pornography. In my opinion, just isn't very masculine.
well, it's a solo addiction that we do
Yeah.
by ourselves. With alcohol, we're with friends. I mean, you look at with gambling, a lot of times it's in a casino or around a poker table.
Yeah.
If food addicts can go to restaurants and have a great time and go grocery shopping, and it's like Valhalla there. A food addict going into a grocery store is like a porn addict going into an adult bookstore, except you're looking around hoping nobody sees you and hoping nobody knows you're going in there to buy porn. And I know that they are a lot less of those now that the internet's out there. But that was a real thing where you would go into the adult bookstore and hope nobody saw you and nobody was in there, and you'd leave with whatever you had in a brown paper bag and quickly get to your car and get out of there, because it is shameful. Because when you think about it, we don't as a society talk very much about nudity. Nudity is a taboo. It's one of those things that, oh my god, naked people equals sex. Not exactly true, but nudity and sex are like peanut butter and chocolate when it comes to a Reese's. They do go together. And we have always been raised, and we come from, or the large majority of us, especially the Caucasians, we come from parts of the world that were very, very puritanical when it came to sexuality. I mean, Eastern and Western Europe back in the 16, 17, 1800s, you're not going to find a more puritanical place on earth. And we come from these people. So it's not surprising that it's passed down over the generations. And then when it specifically comes to pornography, yeah, there is the, one guy going on one girl stuff, but none of us stop at that. And I think that's part of it. I think that, you sit down for a session of looking at pornography, and while you may start at a very sexy, actress that you once seen and wanted to see her naked, you're going to click on something else and click on something else and click on something else. And eventually you can find some really weird shit. And if that really weird shit gets you off, you don't want to share that with people. Yet I will tell you, after having, dozens of clients on the pornography side now, having been through pornography rehab, having been through group therapy, having talked to hundreds and hundreds of fellow addicts, I can tell you that all of us have that weird shit in the back of our head. And in
Yeah.
talking to normal people, all of
What's
us
some
have
of
that
the
weird shit in the back of our head. And you know what? And that's the thing, is that people don't recognize is that the pornography you look at, the pornography you consume, the pornography that you use as a visual aid when you're pleasuring yourself, that does not reflect who you are. If
and
you
it's
are
not
looking,
real.
no, and that's the thing. But if you are looking at, one guy sucking off another guy, that doesn't make you gay. That makes you curious. That makes
Hmm.
you, wondering what it looks like. You know, I don't know how there is a genre for elderly people, grannies and grandpas going at it. Doesn't do it for me, but it does it for some people. And if you're one of those people, and no judgment, hey, I'm glad you found the thing that, gets you off. And as long as it's all above board, that's cool. But you're not going to want to tell somebody that's what it is that gets you off. And that's part of the thing with addiction, is that that thing changes so much. I've seen every kind of pornography out there. And the thing, when you're an addict, and this is what's different for people who are recreational porn users, like I assume you are, is that I wasn't looking for the orgasm. The orgasm was more about a finish line telling me that I got there. What I was looking for was to clear the storm in my mind. And clearing that storm in my head, that's why you become an addict. I used alcohol to numb myself. I used pornography to give myself a false sense of control. When you look at pornography, well, you know what? If you want a blonde girl that day, you can get a blonde girl. You want two Asian girls, you can get an Asian girl. You want three Mexican men and a leprechaun on a lake in Canada while somebody throws tater tots at them, you're going to find it on the internet. And if that's what gets you off and it's consensual and you're not hurting anybody, then you go to town and you enjoy yourself. But understand, you can do this too much and it can lead to negative consequences. You need to know that using porn for a certain segment of society does lead to negative consequences and negative effects. And otherwise than that, enjoy your porn and be, I would not say, be proud of it, but, you are not the porn you look at. And that's an important thing to recognize, because I think what's shameful to a lot of people is the actual content of their porn. They don't want to admit that there's a little itch in the back of their head that needs some scratching. And that can only come from women who are over 6'5", or can only come from an orgy scene or something like that. And for me, as an addict, it didn't matter what I was looking at. It mattered that I found something that tweaked my dopamine, that set the pleasure centers into producing all of their chemicals that made me feel better. And I didn't care if it was a guy, a girl, black, white, green. I don't care what religion. I didn't care. As long as I found something that day that did the trick, perfect. And
Yeah.
that's why you hear from addicts a lot of the time. And I hear it from recreational users, but you hear from addicts where, I sat down to look at porn for half an hour and suddenly 4 hours was gone. And I've talked with guys who have literally spent 10 to 12 hours looking at pornography. I've talked to guys who have literally injured themselves by rubbing their penises raw. They've masturbated so much. Um, or that they get themselves to the point that they can't even get hard because they've just flooded those dopamine receptors to the point that you almost need a nuclear bomb to go off in their head to feel anything. And
Hmm.
nobody wants to get to this point, but you get to this point because you haven't been warned, because you haven't been taught. And that's what's so important, is that we need to be able to talk about pornography if we're going to talk about pornography addiction. And we need to all pull our minds out of the gutter. And hey, the gutter's not a bad place to be if it's safe. It can be fun and whatnot. But we need to also recognize that there can be negativity with this, there can be bad things, and we need to address it. Yeah, I don't think it's a big ask to, act like a grown up. You and I have been talking now for nearly an hour, and we've been talking about pornography, and it hasn't devolved into some, rowdy, scuzzy triple X conversation because it doesn't have to. We can talk about pornography. We know what pornography is. We don't have to worry about what people are going to think of. 80% of men under 50 masturbate at least once a month to pornography. 60% of women under 50 masturbate at least once a month to pornography. The world is doing this stuff. To pretend it's not is silly. More people are actually doing this stuff than not. We might as well just accept it, acknowledge it, be big boys and big girls about it, and talk about how we can make sure that this doesn't harm the next generation the way that it harmed the current one.
Yeah, well, that's a lot. I can see that you do this professionally, of course. Um, so I, anything you don't want to share is totally fine. But what was your rock bottom with your addiction? How did it start?
It was when the police showed up at my door
Okay.
in 2000, early 2014.
Uh huh.
Um, and the quick version of that story is ultimately that in early 2013, I was the publisher and part owner of a magazine company here in Maine. We produce 3 monthly magazines. So I was under a lot of stress, and I saw some indications that the company was going down. Our subscriptions had dropped, our advertising revenue had dropped, but our expenses kept going up. And I'm a very good writer and I'm a very good editor. I'm not a very good businessman. And I didn't know how to save this company. When you're throwing a lot of money at me like that was happening in the beginning, that's cool. I can pretend I'm a good businessman. When things get tough, I'm not, and my cracks in my armor show. I recognize that we probably had 6 months to a year to exist and turn it around. I made a horrible decision in 2013, early 2013, that I was going to pull myself off of my bipolar medication that I'd been on since I've been about 20. I thought that if I could pull myself off of those meds, I would tap into my energetic side, my manic side, my creative side in a way that the medicine probably hurt. This was the stupidest thing and worst mistake I ever made in my life because within 3 or 4 weeks, the medicine was out of my system. But what happened, and this happened through 2013, is that my drinking probably tripled or quadrupled, and my use of pornography tripled or quadrupled. And what ended up happening was over the year, things were going so bad and going downhill. And not just that, but my relationship with my family was falling apart. And I was sleeping only about 3 hours a night. I was just at this place of literally almost rock bottom. And one of the things is that the pornography by itself wasn't enough for me anymore. It you reach a point where I can only watch, so many crazy things, and they're not doing it for me anymore. And as I mentioned earlier, the pornography was about control for me. It was about giving myself a false sense of control. Like I said, if you don't want a blonde girl, you can get an Asian girl. You don't want an Asian girl, you can get a Mexican dude. You can get whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
And if nobody on the page is ever going to say no to you, nobody is ever going to say you didn't do a good job at work today, or how come you didn't take the trash out. When you look at pornography, you are the master of your universe, and you can have any fantasy you want out there. And that gave me a sense of control that when things were bad, I could look at porn and it would make me feel okay. Now, when the porn stopped making me feel okay, when I was, circling the drain, I actually started going into chat rooms, and not the like cam sites, but I would go to things, and they had these 10 years ago where it was P2P, where you would look at somebody. It's almost like you and I on Zoom. We would
Mm-hmm.
connect. If I didn't want to talk to you, I'd hit a button. If you don't want to talk to me, you hit a button. And
Oh yeah, yeah. I know
yeah,
exactly what you're talking about.
those types of P2P sites. And I started to use those, and I figured out a way to essentially get women to start to take off their clothes and to trust me and to sometimes do sexual things to themselves. And I did this just to prove to myself that I was smarter than them and I had control, and all this stuff that, looking back now as a healthy person, is just sick and fucked up.
Mm-hmm.
Um, one and I did that for a couple months. Ironically, I actually stopped in late 2013 and stopped doing it because just something wasn't right about it. And in March of 2014, I was sitting at my kitchen table one morning, doing some work before I headed into the office, and three unmarked police cars pulled up to my house. And you don't have to be a fan of cop shows of the 80s to know what an unmarked police car looks like. It's pretty obvious. And these, when, five guys come out wearing blue golf jackets in March in Maine, you know that they're the police. And I could see them getting out of their vehicles. I had no idea why they were there. And I went to the door, and the guy in front had a search warrant. I was able to pick out a few words quick enough, and they came into the house, and they told me that they believed that I had engaged with an underage woman online. And I said, I don't think so. And then they laid out their proof, and they were right. One of the women who I talked to in the chat rooms was under 18. And here's the thing that really sunk me is that um, if you would have come into my office 10 years ago at the magazine, you would have seen awards and trophies all over the walls and on the shelves. I got every award you can possibly get in Maine for publishing or any of that stuff. And I didn't have those on the wall to show you how awesome I was. I had those on the wall to convince myself I was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And trophies meant you are good, you are okay, you are valuable. So what did I do if I had one of these, 2 a.m. sessions with a woman where I was able to convince her to do something sexual online? Towards the end, I would take a couple screen captures. Now, I didn't take these so they would be masturbation material, because I know how the internet works. I can find naked chicks. That's not the problem. Why I did that was because they were like little trophies.
Mm-hmm.
I could see them. Okay, you know what? While this is messed up, while this is really sick thinking, I told myself and rationalized to myself that if I can get this woman to do what I want, while I'm still capable of doing something now, aren't I? I'm still capable of winning the game. I'm still on top. And one of the ways that I proved that to myself was by taking a screen capture or two. And these police showed me two screen captures I took, and they said, in doing this, you have just created child pornography, because
Mm-hmm.
she was a teenage girl under 18 years old. And it was like, holy shit. And what could I say? They had me. I didn't ask this girl's age. I didn't, she looked old enough to me, but you and I both know there are 16-year-olds who look 26 and 26-year-olds who look 16. And you can't use that. And I try very hard not to rationalize, not to minimize. What I did was absolutely wrong. And it wasn't wrong just because she was a teenager. It was wrong doing it to 23-year-olds and 28-year-olds and 34-year-olds. I totally catfished them. I totally got them to buy into me because I had such a long history as a investigative reporter. I'm very good at making people talk, and I'm very good at making people answer questions that they don't want to answer. And with a lot of the women on there, I was just a evil cad. And I mean, sick, but still freaking evil. And
Mm-hmm.
so, when you do that, and thankfully I didn't get nailed for any of that stuff, but they had to arrest me because I engaged, or I encouraged an underage female to act in a sexual manner online. And she didn't know that I took those two screen captures. So I got arrested, and that was my huge wake-up call, was being arrested. I don't think that my parents or my wife or my kids or the people I work with, I don't think any of them could have had an intervention, and I would have listened. The only thing that really could have control over me is the law.
Mhm.
And they arrested me that day. My wife came and picked me up at jail. I was only there about 30 minutes. Never saw the inside of a cell because I knew all the officers there. They read the magazine. Everybody in town knew who I was. I was a former city council member. I was very well known in town, so maybe I got a little bit of special treatment. But my wife came and picked me up, and I said to her, "Listen, this is crazy. I am not going to stand in your way if you want a divorce. You can have the kids, you can have the house, you can have the car. What I just got arrested for was way too much to ask anybody to stick around." And she just looked at me and said, "Well, did it involve little kids?" And I said, "No, it was a teenage girl, and I didn't know she was. I was not looking for that." And she said, "Okay, I just want to make sure of that." And she said, "We know you've been sick for a while, and none of us have been able to get through to you. Maybe this will be the thing." And the next day, I went and met with my lawyer, and his first question was, "Is this a sentencing game or is this a litigation game?" And I said, "No, they got me. It's a sentencing game." So he said, "Well, do you have any drug or alcohol issues?" And I said, "No, I don't." And both my wife and father said, "Oh, he drinks way too much. He's an alcoholic. He is a drunk." And "You think so?" And they're like, "Really?" And it's like, "Okay, yes, yes, okay, I drink too much." So my lawyer said, "We're going to get you to a facility, and we're going to get that straightened out. And that will be something that we can also show the judge whenever it gets time that we're in front of one. That's something we can show the judge." And I was like, "Okay, whatever I need to do, I can send me to rehab for 28 days, and I'll ace it, and I'll come back, and I'll show the judge my little certificate, and she'll be so proud of me." And my lawyer said, "Wait, stop, stop." He said, "Listen, you may go to jail, you may not. You may have a fine, you may not. You may have a long probation period, you may not. We don't know what's going to happen, and we won't know for a while. But when this is all said and done, the legal stuff will end one day. And when this is all said and done, do you want to be the same asshole you are now? Wouldn't you like to get better? Wouldn't you like to not have to be an alcoholic?" And that kind of woke me up. I'm so glad he said that to me, because while I went off to rehab, and I will admit the first week I was like, "I don't belong here." After about 7, 8 days, I realized I was exactly the alcoholic they were talking about. I finally embraced the program, and instead of being there 28 days like in a movie, I was actually there 70 days. I was there 10 weeks because I needed it. And when I look back, people ask me, "What's your rock bottom?" I say that it's when the police officer showed up at my door. But I think it probably, honestly, was a few minutes prior to that, because that was the
Yeah.
end of me being an active addict. And while I went to the door, and once I realized why they were there, I realized my life was changed forever. You don't get nabbed with something like that, and your life isn't changed forever. It was on all of the TV news that night. It was in newspapers the next day because of how well I was known locally. Um,
Not in your newspaper though.
well, no, I didn't cover it because my magazine didn't cover stuff like that. It
Uh.
probably would have,
Okay.
but I got fired from it that day.
Yeah.
The three co-owners, because I was the active editor, they did other things. They actually fired me from that day, and bought me out later down the road. But yeah, I had to deal with TV cameras. I had to deal with newspapers. Every time I went to court, there were TV cameras there, and I didn't actually get sentenced for 2 years. I was arrested in March of 2014. I was not sentenced till January of 2016, and I ended up serving 6 months in county jail for what I did.
Hmm.
And what's funny is that during those 2 years, that's when I went to the two rehabs. That's when I was in therapy every week. That's when I was doing as much research as I could. That's when I even started my first book. And when I got in front of the judge, she was up front. She was like, "You are a different person now than you were. I know that. I'm not sentencing the same guy. However, you can't get away with this." And people do need to know that, no matter who you are. So she sentenced me to 9 months. I served 6. And while I was in jail, I served kind of as my first coaching. I had a lot of the guys come up to me and be like, "Okay, I have sex with 10 women a week, and I don't even know why. Do you think that's a problem? And it's like, yeah, I do. I do. And, or,
Maybe.
you know, in my job on the outside at lunchtime, instead of going to the, the food room with the other guys and sitting down there, I have to go to my car and look at porn online. Is that normal? And it's like, no, no, that for you to pass up having lunch and hanging out with friends to look at, people you don't know having very impractical sex on a tiny phone, that's a problem. That is a problem. So I actually got some of my sea legs in coaching, talking once they trusted me in jail. I kind of started doing that stuff, and I kept writing. And then when I got out, I decided I was going to do more. So, to get back to your question, I guess it was a few minutes before I got arrested, because that was the last time I was an active addict.
Yeah.
And I looked at those officers as kind of like demons in the beginning, and kind of like, there to ruin my life. And now, thankfully, with enough time, I can look back and realize they were angels who set me free. I mean, I was in shackles for 2 decades because of this, and they set me free, and now I can help other people. And if I'm healthier, happier, spiritually, physically, mentally. I have better relationships with my wife and my kids and my parents. I am so much better off and feel so much better with where I am now at 45 than I ever did at 35, than I ever did at 25. And it wouldn't have happened if those guys hadn't come to the door. Yes, I'm never going to be a magazine editor or publisher ever again. Yes, I have a felony in my background, and that's going to cause certain problems if I try to do certain things in life. I can never own a gun, for instance. But I got to tell you, 10 times out of 10, I'm going to make the same trade off that was forced upon me, because I
Yeah.
feel so much better.
Do you have to say you're a sex offender whenever you do something?
Nope, nope. I mean,
No.
and the thing
So you're
that's nice
not.
for me is,
Uh huh.
I'm on the list, but
Mhm.
I work from home, so it's not like any employer has to find out. And I already own a home. I already own cars. I don't have to go and take out loans. My wife can still take out loans on her own. I'm not looking for rent in apartments. I don't have really any. The only thing that I have to do is a couple times a year, I go down to the police station locally and I tell them, hey, it's me, and I still live where I said I did. I still have the
Yeah.
job I said I do. Hope all is good with you. And they're like, yeah, that's cool. Good to see you, Josh. Write any new books lately or anything like that? They're all very cool with me. And I mean, it's an inconvenience doing that a couple times a year, but it beats jail, it beats probation, and it beats being as sick as I was. I think about
Totally.
people, somebody who has diabetes has to put insulin in their body with a shot every day. I'll take going to the police station a couple times a year for 10 minutes versus putting insulin in my body every day.
Totally.
Or so many other things that happen to people that they have to live with. I was very sick. I made some very bad choices. And yes, this will hang over me the rest of my life, but I also own it. And that's one of the things that makes me very different than other people out there, is that I'll tell this story. I'll talk about porn addiction. I will talk about my struggles because it's happening to people all over the place. One of the things that the DA told me after I was arrested, he said to me, because I knew him because I'd interviewed him like 2 months earlier for my magazine. And he told me, he's like, Josh, only about 1 out of 100 guys who do what you did get caught. Unfortunately, you're the one. And I was like, oh man, that's horrible odds. I can't believe that. I look at that differently now. I now say, oh my God, I had a lottery ticket. I was the one they caught so I could stop. Because if I didn't stop, I don't know where the alcohol and porn would have gone. I can't even say that I'd be here today talking to you, because I don't know if I'd be alive, 8 years later after all this went down.
Well, it's also like you with your background as a journalist and a newspaper editor, and from our talk so far, you're a great storyteller, a great talker. You had to be the one to get caught, change your life around, and so now you can help other people. Like that wouldn't have happened if you didn't go through that. But now you're here helping people and changing people's lives, and you're doing it the best way possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing, is that it's funny that people who know me from my previous life, a lot of them still won't talk to me. They won't deal with me, and I don't think it's because of the charges. And like I said, I'm not going to minimize them, but as far as a sex crime goes, it was
Hmm.
hands off. It was, the person was 3,000 miles away. I had an addiction that I took care of. Most people like yourself who have met me in the last few years, hear my story, don't have any problem with it whatsoever, and even congratulate me on turning things around. The people I
Totally.
knew, the people I knew professionally 10, 12 years ago, if I see them out in society, I'd say about half of them actively try to avoid me. And I don't think that necessarily has to do with the crime. I think that has to do with the fact that I presented myself for so many years as somebody different. And I presented, while I was the, magazine guy, and I'd go to all the different events, and I was on the city council making decisions for a while. I also had this part of myself that I hid, that I knew was, not healthy, that I knew was shameful. And when it not only does it come out, it comes out attached to being involved with an underage girl. It's damning as hell, and I can either hide and not see anybody, or I can go out there and hold my head high and say, yeah, I was fucked up, and now I'm trying to teach people how not to be, because I don't want them to go down this road. And I'm trying to live my best life possible now. I'm trying to not make it all about me, and I'm trying to, see what I can do to put good into the world, because I was a taker for so many years, and now
Hmm.
I'm trying to be a giver. But so many of these people are still like, you lied to us. And you presented yourself as something different. So I don't have a lot of people locally who I talk to. Um, most of my people, my clients who I deal with, all telehealth, all over the country, and even a couple people in Europe now. I do these podcasts with you. Like you said earlier, technology is amazing. Yesterday, I had my client in the UK, and then I did an early morning podcast with someone in Nigeria.
Mm.
When
Wow.
in my life would I ever talk to Europe
Right?
and Africa on the same day? So, that's kind of cool. And it's nice to think that I'm
Yeah.
helping people around the world. And I can look at Amazon and see that my books have sold around the world. And I can look at library databases and see that my books are in, over 1,000 libraries throughout the world. And this is all cool. And it does make my ego feel good. But at the core of it, is trying to just educate and let people know they don't have to end up like I did. And I know that there's somebody listening right now who may be thinking, oh, well, I've got a little bit of an issue with pornography, but I'm not like this guy. I'm never going to end up like he did. And I'll tell you, you know what? I never thought I'd end up like I did. It
Hmm.
took 24 years to get to the point where I spent a few months doing this with women. And that I never thought I could get there. I never thought I would be doing something like that. I certainly never thought that, I would be ever caught for something like that, from the police, and have lifelong repercussions. But the person who's listening to themselves saying, I'm never going to go as far as he, you might. And that's why you
Hmm.
need to pay attention. I never thought I'd go this far. I never thought I could get to the level of sickness where I would be doing what, in my opinion, is cheating on my wife.
Oh, totally.
I think that's crossing a line. That's something I didn't share with her. Why? I didn't want her to know about it. Why? Because it was cheating in a form. It wasn't physical sex, but it was certainly a dereliction of my vows as a husband. And it's sad that I got to that place. But if I can get to that place, a professional who owned a business, father of two, I have a nice house, I've got a great family. Um, Porn addicts are not just your 18-year-old guy who lives in his mom's basement who's never kissed a girl in real life. Porn addicts are not your 75-year-old guy running through the park in a trench coat flashing people. I've met men and women ranging in age from 15 and 16 up until the high 70s. I've met every color, every religion, stupid people, smart people. I've met doctors, I've met lawyers, and I've met homeless people who all have porn addiction. Anybody can have it. And that's what's really important for people to recognize. And if you think you have an issue with porn addiction, you need to get some help to at least have it diagnosed properly. And then you can create a strategy from there. But porn addiction is a real thing. I am proof of it. I am proof that it can hit anybody, but I'm also proof you can get better. But wouldn't it be better to not have to go into treatment? Wouldn't it be better to not have to fix the stuff that I did? Wouldn't it be better to not end up on the police's radar? Um, get yourself some help if you have a problem. And it's not just porn addiction, it's any kind of addiction, because addiction takes place in the brain. And whether it's
Mm-hmm.
cocaine or porn or sex or gambling or you name it, 95% of addiction is the same. It all takes place in the brain. And a lot of people switch addictions thinking that they got better. And that's something that you have to watch out for as well. I've talked to a lot of porn addicts who were cokeheads or who had gambling diseases or addictions before, and they think that they've licked it, yet they don't realize that their addiction has just moved on to something else. The same faulty brain activity is going. It's just going with something else, but they celebrate the success of not being an addict for their original thing. So it's an important thing to pay attention to. We as a society just need to be more aware of how addiction operates.
Yeah. So I know you don't have a whole lot of time, so let me get to the questions I like to ask everyone.
Yes,
Eh,
I've been looking forward to this. What's your
So
first email? Before birth is nothing. You're
mhm.
not here. You're not organic material. And I would love to, believe you're a spirit floating around in the air, but there is zero data that ever suggests that. Anybody who suggests that's a reality, that's a story. It's a nice story, but it's not real. So there's nothing here before you're born when it comes to you. But the world was here way before you got here, and the world was fine before you got here, and the world will be fine after you're gone. So don't worry about the world. Worry about yourself. The point, and as far as why are we born, we're born because our biological parents got it on roughly 9 months earlier for whatever reason, and we are the scientific outcome of a sperm hitting an egg and it getting to hibernate for 9 months. As far as finding a bigger secret meaning of life, I've stopped doing that because I think it's a waste of fucking energy, and I have just so much energy to go around that
Cool.
I can't waste it on fairy tales.
I like it. I like it. I should stop my podcast then, huh? Just kidding.
No, you do
So,
whatever you want. You make
yeah.
yourself happy. I'm just
No.
sharing my outlook.
Uh-huh. So with that then, how come birth leads to death and what's after death?
Well, birth leads to death because that's the case for all organic matter.
Hmm.
People are not special that way. Every single animal on this earth will die. Every living thing, plant, microbe, everything will eventually die. That's just the way it works. Why does it work that way? I don't think science has figured that out. I guess the organic matter degrades to the point where it can't continue onward. Um, After death, I like to believe that, oh, well, I mean, first of all, I think you're dead. I think you're in the ground. I think that decomposition happens over time, depending on how good your casket is, or whether you've been put to ashes. But I think that I think part of dying is good because I think it flushes the negativity out of the world. It's always with younger people where you see positivity, I mean, not every individual, and you see old
Hmm.
people who are cool too, but you see positivity, you see hope, you
I
see
was just
the
about to say
idea
that.
that the world can be a better place. And
Yeah.
I think, and you see people who are going to do it. If you would have told people in the 1930s who thought it was amazing that they, built a steam engine, 50 years earlier, if you would have told them that, how we would be communicating right now, and what a computer was, they wouldn't even understand.
Yeah.
And they would, I think that it's a good thing that we sort of harvest the population and create a new one, because I think it moves us towards a world that we understand better. And while there may be some coldness, while it may not be as romantic or as touching as the stories we tell ourselves, I think that it's a good thing that the world continues to move forward, that there's always progress.
So what's after death though? Do you
Well,
have any?
nothing. Although I
Uh-huh.
like to believe that, through the differences you made in the world, so,
Yeah.
there's a dude out there who's listening to you and I right now, who is going to change his porn habits because he's listening to us. Maybe he's
Yeah.
listening to us 5 days after this came out. Maybe he's listening to us 5 years after this came out. Maybe by the time he listens to this, one or both of us are dead.
Mm-hmm.
But we have this record of ourselves. We have done this while we were here. We have influenced people. And I believe that your influence on others, as minor as, your neighbor, or as major as, father and son, I think that you leave a lot of yourself behind based on who you help, who you're kind to, who you love, and what lessons you can teach, and what lessons you show in how you live your everyday life. I think while nothing happens to us in death, who cares? So much happens to us in life. We have the chance right now to make people's lives great. We have the chance to be good people. We have the chance to make a society the way we would actually like to see it. We don't have any of this in death. So uh, I, I urge people not to get too wrapped up in how am I going to die, what's going to happen, because you're here now. Make the most of it now.
Mm-hmm. We pretty much just answered the next question, which was the stuff in between. That was,
Two
was
for
pretty,
one.
yeah. Um, so what do you think deja vu is?
That's a great question. That's a really good question. I would
Mm-hmm.
love to look that up and see if there's anything scientific behind it. You know what? I think it's just one of those things like daydreaming.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, really, I think it's like daydreaming. It's a form of thinking. It's brain activity. Why does it feel like we've been there before? I don't know, but I also have ASMR and have the while crinkling paper and sexy women whispering doesn't do it for me. I do have ASMR responses to certain things. I can't
Mm-hmm.
tell you why. I know they've been there since a kid. I tried to explain them to people since I was a kid, and it's only in the last 10 years that people are actually admitting this happens to them. So it's so individual from person to person, and I spend my days preaching self-love, self-care, that you cannot ultimately depend on somebody else for your contentment. You have to love yourself before you can love anybody else and love what's out there.
Mm-hmm.
I
I
hope
like
that
that.
quasi answers the question.
No, that's a good answer. Good answer. So, the last question I'll ask you, since gotta take that wife out to dinner. Of course, I don't want to interrupt that. Is you got
No,
any
and
alien
spend
or?
and spend some good money.
Yes, exactly. Do you have any alien or ghost stories?
I don't, because I've never met either.
Uh huh.
The closest one I have, and I'm skeptical, and I wish an alien would take me, or I wish a ghost would come up and say, "Boo, yeah, we're real." And but I've never had that. But I had one person. It was a Native American girl. She was 18, maybe 19, who I met in my first rehab. And she told me and a group of people a story about repeatedly seeing a ghost on her reservation, like
Mm-hmm.
2 years earlier, and how it was just understood among the reservation that that ghost was there, and other people had seen it. And she told this story so seriously, and how she took pictures of it, had it on her camera, and her grandmother erased them because you're not allowed to take pictures of this spirit. Um, and it was like, okay, this story really sounds believable. It's the
Mm-hmm.
only one that I've ever heard from somebody, face to face, that I truly believed how earnest they were. I've never had it happen to me. I believe in ghosts less than I believe in aliens. I think I have no proof, or real good, legit proof, that ghosts exist. However, when it comes to aliens and it comes to the vastness of space, it seems silly to believe that just looking at the numbers that we are the only people out there,
Hmm.
or we are the only things out there. And you got to keep in mind there may be another society 500 light years away asking these same questions, and we're the aliens. Um,
Yeah,
it
totally.
just it just seems it just seems weird to me that um, or it seems impossible to me that with all of the stars, which are suns, which all can have planets rotating them, and with how large what's known as the green belt, where an inhabitable planet could be off of
Yeah,
so many of these stars, there's got to be other stuff out there. I mean, there's got to be.
totally. Okay, I got one last question. I lied.
Cool. Nope, that's
Um,
fine. I like liars.
do you think karma exists? And do you believe in karma?
Absolutely.
Uh huh.
100%. 100%. I'm not religious at all. I'm not super spiritual, but I do believe that there is some kind of energy, and it's a balancing energy out there. How the hell do we stay in orbit? How the hell
Hmm.
do we not fly off the earth? How the hell do all of these scientific laws work at the same time and for the most part work in harmony? How do we not accidentally fucking die by the time we're five? With all
Hmm.
of the things that could kill us, we should all be dead by then. How is it that so many people who you would think might kill themselves don't and keep going? There's something about the human spirit that is amazing. And there's something about this world that is amazing. And I believe that it stays operational because there is some kind of balancing energy out there that we just don't understand yet. And maybe someday we will. Maybe it'll be a scientific thing. That'd be an awesome breakthrough because then
Hmm.
everybody would believe it. There are a lot of things with science we have not yet discovered. We have not yet figured out. Science is ongoing. And I like to believe that there are things that, philosophical questions we ask ourselves now that in 2,000 years, science may be able to answer.
Hmm. I love it. I love it. Well, you have a beautiful dinner with your wife. I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us. My last question was is always can you give advice to anyone? But I think you pretty much did that at the
I can
first
give advice to people all day long. That's what I
yeah.
do.
But I don't want to keep you, so thank you for your time.
Appreciate it. The stuffed shells are calling, and yeah, thank you very much for letting me talk to your audience. Like I said, this will make a difference. I hear from people who it makes a difference. I've been doing
Oh,
podcasts for years, and I have people who will come to me and say, "3 years ago, you did this show, and it changed my life." And I'll go back on YouTube and look at it, and it's got 108 views, and it's like, okay, that not many people watched it, but one person did, and it changed their
yeah.
life, and that is so huge. That I have this message, but you have the medium, and you allowed me to
Hmm.
share the medium with you. So I want to thank you very much.
Do you want to plug anything like any new books coming out or
Send people to my website because everything is there, whether it's my
okay.
books, my coaching, or other articles I've written. If you want some resources about pornography addiction, it's all at my website. That is paddictrecovery.com. And while we didn't talk about it here, if you're the partner of a porn addict who is dealing with the betrayal trauma that comes from it, I deal with that as well. So whether you're an addict or whether you're a partner of an addict, that website will have a lot of stuff to help. And if you need anything, you can contact me through the website. Happy to help anybody out there.
Beautiful. I love it. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you very much, Jacob. It was nice meeting you.
Thank you for listening to my podcast. Down below in the description will be a link to all my social media accounts where you can get news, interact with me, and enjoy my art. But more importantly is a link to my Discord server, Facebook group, and subreddit. These will be discussion boards where we'll talk about the podcast and all the stories we hear on each episode. But more importantly is I want to hear your story, your thoughts, your perspectives on what you think life is. All the questions I ask, I want to know your answers and have conversations with you and anyone that needs to talk about something or just wants to talk to someone. Because at the end of the day, no matter how much hate we feel towards someone or something, we were all born and we will all die. But for right now, we're stuck in the in between.